And most of the things that we have in common when we're um, living at a high level is this idea that we have a peak performance that we have to level up to in order for us to do what we do best. Well, when a person is under stress or is triggered, then the first thing that happens, and I'm sure all of you know this, but I'm still going to say it, I'm going to say it anyway. We activate the stress response. And what happens with the stress response? I tell my clients, I show them like this. So if this is the brain and you open up the brain, in the center of the brain here, there's a little small area that's called the amygdala. And once the siren goes off or the alarm goes off, immediately norepinephrine is released into the adrenal glands. And once that takes place, then cortisol is released and adrenaline is released. And then our heart starts to pound, and then our thoughts begin to race, and we may get sweaty hands, or we may begin to profusely begin to perspire. But what's happening is our brain is telling us that we are no longer safe, that we are under attack. And whether that is a physical or environmental attack, or if it's an emotional or psychological attack, it's still a perceived attack. And therefore, we launch into fight, flight, or freeze. And that's what we saw with Woody. He was launching into fight, flight, and he wanted to jump up and get away from the moment. And so that's a normal stress response. But Jason, the big question is what happens when a person's constantly smacked and bombarded and smacked and bombarded and smacked and it's just this vicious cycle. What happens then? Well, we get into chronic stressors or chronic stress. And I believe that that's what Woody's going through.
Wow. Okay, so let's back up a little bit. So we're in this stress situation, and this could apply because we initially started out talking about the jury, because we felt like the jury was going to be under stress or some kind of duress because they're only making $25 a day, and they got house notes and all this kind of stuff like that, and you're in here for 9 hours a day, and it's cold in the courtroom. Oh my goodness, it's cold. So we started out talking about the jury, really.
Yeah.
But then, like, what about, looking at this gentleman right here? And again, there have been several instances that Woody has had, but there's also been several other instances of other witnesses who, again, were street dudes. Now, 10 years later, they got wife and kids. They're street dudes. Now they're out here trying to work a real job. And they're in the same kind of situation. So this fight or flight situation. But does it have to be like high grade stress all the time? Or can it just be like a drumbeat of just instead of being on 10, like you're on 6 all the time instead of being on 3. Like talk about that.
Yeah, there is that. And two, when it's that 5 or 6 area, and it's kind of, I like to call it a silent hum. It's just the constant stream of stress. And what's happening is still cortisol is being released into the body, adrenaline is being released into the body because the brain, and I like to look at it like this. If you look at research, oftentimes researchers will say the brain is not really that smart. And the reason why that is because the brain cannot differentiate between what is reality and what is fantasy.
Gotcha.
We essentially tell our brain what's real. That's how we can have perceived fears. They're not really fears. It's just the perception of fear. However, the body and the brain still responds to the perception that we have that we are in danger. And so and I think that you hit the nail on the head, Jason, when you said, when we're talking about the jurors, it's not just sitting in the courtroom being exposed to all sorts of stress related issues as it relates to the trial. But what about all the stress related issues that they're having to deal with at home or not being able to deal with some real life threatening issues. If they're making $25 a day, how are they providing for their families? How are they stabilizing their home environment? How are they going to be there to help their kids go to soccer practice or basketball practice? How are they able to do what really needs to be done on a day-to-day basis? They're not. And so there's the psychological implications of not being able to support their family. So that in and of itself is stress as well. And so now we have compounded stress, and that's where the chronic stress comes in. And you're right.